Hey guys, Rich here. Got a couple updates, just things I'm working on the CRF450L, and wanted to bring you guys up to speed and also get your opinions. So in the last video, I finished installing the hardware that Skag sells to add to their rear rack that gives you mounting points for the givi cases. And that consists of this rear wedge and these two front pieces here. The only downside of this is they protrude from the rack. These in the front don't protrude that far. You can see it's less than the height of my index finger, and the wedge in the back is about like kind of 2 fingers high, not quite, I guess. And the mounting points are quite strong. So the givi box that I'm talking about is this guy here. And I did have this on riding off-road, and I could hear it knocking around back there a bit, but it does seem very sturdy. I do, however, worry though that if I left this thing on all the time, you know, kind of using it as my primary case, even when I'm not, you know, on an overnight trip, that I'm eventually going to knock this thing off of a tree, or I'm going to lay the bike over hard, and it's either going to damage the box or it's going to damage the, you know, the mounting points, or possibly even the subframe of the bike. It's just, it's not the right thing to have on there when you're just out on a day trip riding single track. I want to get back to being able to run just my Wolfman Peak Tail Bag. This is the bag I ran on my WR250R for years, and it's a great bag. It actually expands a little larger than this. And if you have one of these bags, you might notice that mine looks a bit different because I cut the strap mounting points off the side. I thought it made the bag too difficult to get on and off, and it moved around back there. I hated that mounting system. So what I had done on my WR was I cut a piece of cutting board actually into the shape of the bottom of the bag, and this just fit in here like this. And those Skag's racks have rotopacks, pre-drilled and pre-tapped holes in them, and this lined up with that. So I had 2 holes cut in the bottom of this bag. This bag it's great, but it's already not waterproof, so I'm not too concerned about cutting some holes in the bottom, as long as you don't, you know, slice the whole thing up. Anyway, this worked great. I ran this for years. It never moved around. Aesthetically, it looked really nice without having the straps, and it was just 2 small bolts to take this thing on and off. One downside is this cutting board is actually a little on the heavy side. It's a high-density polyethylene, and I'm not saying it's heavy. It's not like it's a piece of steel, but it is a little on the heavy side. But it worked very, very well. So I wanted to still be able to run this tail bag. And my first thought was to make a plate that would go onto those givi mounting points. And this was sort of design iteration 1. And this has grooves on the bottom. This is all 3D printed, by the way. It's a composite of a hard plastic material and a flexible, very durable material for the front where it goes over these guide blocks. And this actually worked pretty well. Hard to get on here one-handed. Oh, I'm seeing that down on that side. There we go. So the front's locked in. And I never got around, I didn't get as far as designing a sliding piece in the rear with a spring to lock into this wedge like the givi cases do. This first iteration ended up being really bulky. You can see I made some marks on here. And I also was not happy with the joint here. In addition to working with, I wanted to do this out of 2 different materials. This is just simply too big to print in one piece on a standard 3D printer. So I had a second iteration. See, this one joins together much more strongly. Design on the front is largely the same, with the exception of I modified the front so that it could be tipped in like the givi case and come straight down on the back. So this one can hold it at an angle like this, slide it on, and then it drops straight down. And I was to the point where really I just needed to design the sliding rear locking piece. But let me grab the bag. The bag would sit on here like this. And a couple issues with this. Number one, you have the added girth of this plate going over these front pieces. It raises the center of gravity of the whole bag. And I would print this in black, ultimately, but it's just, I don't know. I just feel like it's so much bulk to add just to have this bag on here. And that's even without the rear piece and the spring. And this is not, it's not really heavy, but it's probably 2 or 3 pounds. So let's call it 3 to 4 pounds with the back sliding piece that I hadn't finished designing yet. And it's a pain to do with all the different 3D printed pieces. So I kind of abandoned this, and not fully. I'm still going to finish this design and make the locking part in the back, just because this could be essentially a universal plate to mount anything. I could screw a milk crate down onto this, or just something else that I might want to put on the back of this bike ultimately. But I changed up my thinking on this entirely, and I made a test piece just to get the location of everything. So this sits over this wedge. And these 2 holes in the front line up with the Rotopax mounting holes in the Skaggs racks. This is universal to these Skaggs racks. They all have, whether it's the ADV rack or the smaller rack, they all have these 2 drilled and tapped holes in them for the Rotopax stuff. So this gave me my rough measurements, and what I did, this out of here, I made some more cuts in the bottom of this bag. Now this is going to be probably controversial, but I mean, the way these bags are designed, it's like it's a rubber piece on the bottom, and then there's some foam in the center, and then a piece of fabric on the inside. So when you cut into this, it's basically ripstop. It doesn't keep going. And keep in mind, this bag is not waterproof in the first place. But the way this works is the bag sits down over that wedge in the back. And the reason there's 4 holes here is the first set of holes was for the mounting on my WR with that cutting board plate that I showed you. The second set of holes lines up with where the bag needs to sit on this rack now. By the way, the reason the location changed is so that the bag sits behind the givi mount points in the front. It's hard to tell, but there's about 1.5 millimeters of clearance. It's actually not touching right up against that. And then I designed this piece. So this is basically the same shape as that cutting board. It's a little bit thinner, way lighter, because 3D printed stuff is actually hollow inside. It's solid layers of plastic with just a grid inside. And I designed essentially a piece that fits right over that wedge into this plate. So this plate just sits down there like that, covering that wedge, and this whole thing tightens down, so it also seals up the bottom of the bag. So, you know, when you're riding through mud holes or whatever, you're not getting crap, you know, either caught up between the bottom of the bag and the rack, or even worse, up inside the bag itself. And there's recesses in here for washers as well. And one revision I was thinking of on this is I might get a set of stainless steel fender washers and make these even larger, so there's even a larger surface area for spreading out the force of tightening this down on. Let me go grab the hardware, and I'll mount this up, and you can see how this looks all. All right, so that goes on super fast. It's just two hex head, or I guess we call these cap head. It's just two small machine screws and those washers. The washers actually sit flush at the top of this, as there's a recess designed for them. And that's it. Holds it firmly down onto the rack. And I guess, you know, short downside, you're losing a little bit of space to this wedge inside. It's, you know, it's less than 2 fingers high. Really does not take up very much of the volume of the interior of this bag. And yeah, there's 2 machine screws rather than, you know, ideally what would be just a quick release on the back, similar to what I originally had in mind. But the advantages of this are there's no bulk. It's actually lighter that piece inside, that custom designed piece, is much lighter than the high density polyethylene cutting board I was using before. So it's a very, very sturdy mount, and there's no bulk to it whatsoever. And this rack, this is the ADV rack. This rack completely clears all of the givi hardware. I sold the WR to a friend of mine, so I could probably test this on his as well, just to make sure that everything still lines up with those mounting points. But since we're more or less centered on this rack, I think it will. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I might even consider producing and selling these if there's interest. I know the Wolfman Peak Tail is a pretty popular bag on a lot of different bikes. I really like it. I've had it for well, 4 or 5 years now. And aside from the fact that in heavy rain, especially if it's not full and the top like this is, you know, it has a spot for rainwater to collect, water will get in here. It's a lot better if the bag is loaded up and instead this is sort of sloped on the top. Then for the most part, things stay dry. That's the only thing I change. If Wolfman came out with a quote-unquote waterproof version of this bag, I would buy it. I'd sell this one and pony up for it. I also have a set of tires that are going to go on this bike. The ones I got for this bike are these IRC TR8s. You can see the sizes there. And these ones on the bottom, these are my buddy Mike's. These are for his DRZ, which is living in my garage right now. He got a great deal on this bike, and I tell you, it's power-wise, it is not far off from the 450L. This thing's got a pipe and an airbox mod, and I'm assuming was rejetted. Don't get me wrong, the 450L is faster, but I tell you, it is not a wide margin. But I'll be getting these on soon. I haven't decided if I'm going to put them on myself or just take them down to the shop. When I bought the bike, they wouldn't budge on price at all. I got the bike, you know, very early on when they came out, and this was the first one that they got in. But I did manage to negotiate at least a free install of two tires. So I think I might, as long as they haven't forgotten about that, I think I'm going to roll this down to the local shop and have those guys put these on so I don't have to fight with them. These are actually the same tires I ran on my WR. I found that they were a good mix for both street and dirt usage. They work well on the rocky terrain we have in northeast Pennsylvania, as well as the sand in Jersey, out in Morton State Forest. I do a pretty good job in both. And again, these are the IRC TR8s. I'll link these down below, as well as these Wolfman Peak Tail Bags. If you haven't checked these out, they are a little pricey. I want to say they're like maybe $120 or something like that, but they're well worth it. Great bag. Thanks for watching, guys. Let me know what you think of the plate inside.